Hello, my name is Ben Martin, and this is my final project. It's an analysis of FIFA 2019, looking at player performance and valuation. So, FIFA 2019, for those not aware, is a video game. It's released on most major platforms, and it focuses around soccer. It mirrors real-world people, teams, and characters to let people play against each other online, against computers, or in person with friends. And I chose it because it mirrors real life very accurately. They have constantly updated contract information. The stats are stats recorded by actual talent scouts for professional teams. And the data is structured, which makes it well suited for the kind of analysis that we want to do. Now, I was looking into what countries are going to be the best producers of soccer players, and I wanted to see if I could find a relationship between player value and their ability ratings in the game. Finally, I wanted to look at how do individual statistics contribute to a single player. So, for instance, I'm going to be looking at Lionel Messi, and I just want to see which of his stats are the biggest contributors to his overall rating. So the reason I chose this data set is that I love soccer, I love video games, and I love economics, and those three all kind of come in sync really well in FIFA. Again, because of that structured data, because they have all the contract information, and because it's a soccer video game. Now, I don't follow soccer as much anymore. I used to be really big into it, and in my adult life, I just don't have as much time. So this is a great opportunity for me to get to dig back into the data and see how some of my favorite characters or some favorite players are still doing in the game today. I also chose this because as I was working on it, it turned out that it was a lot more complicated than I thought, and I found it very rewarding when I was actually able to make progress. So it really challenged me to stick with it and to come out with a good final product. So the questions that I want to answer with my research are: which countries are the best producers of soccer players? For this context, I'll be saying that best means that they produce a large number of players and that they produce players with a high average value and a high average player overall rating in the game. The second question I wanted to answer is there a quantifiable relationship between player value, player rating, and wages? And essentially, are teams making good financial decisions, spending their money correctly, and are they valuing players correctly, essentially? Something else that I do touch on in this dashboard, which wasn't part of my original analysis, was if we pick a single player, like Messi, which of their metrics are driving their rating? And I was able to find some of that through my analysis. So I separated out into 3 different dashboards, one to kind of answer each of the questions, and I'm going to show you them now. So first we have the global dashboard. This is what users would look at if they want to try and answer the first question, and they want to talk about, what countries are the best producers of soccer players. So you can see we have a map on the left, and that chart shows the average value in each of players from each of the countries. And if you hover over, it also shows details such as the number of players there and their average ability in game, their average overall rating. So you can use that, and we can see here on the map that there's some countries in Africa that have very high overall average value. I don't pick them as a top producer of soccer players, though, because the number of records that they have, the number of players actually produced from those countries, is quite low. And then also on this dashboard, I try and give just an overall summary, show some of the highest played players in a selected region. So you can filter this by country or you can filter this by club. And you can see the geographic distribution of players and their values for a given club. The other part of this dashboard is I wanted to tie all my dashboards together. So this dashboard ties to the next by selecting a club and then clicking that Load Club Data button. And that will take you to a club dashboard which answers follow-up questions. So here we can see if I had filtered to a single club before I click on the Load Club Data. Now I filtered it to one club, and we get to see that the most valuable players are coming from Argentina. Again, that's being kind of miscorrectly represented because there's only one player from Argentina and he's the most valuable player on the team. We do see some players from Brazil, and actually Spain and France also have a bunch of players there. If we click into the club dashboard for the Load Club Data button, now users will be able to look at the relationship between player ability and player potential. They'll be able to see how age factors in, and then in the bottom chart on the left, we have value and ability, and the size of those circles is actually representative of wage. So we can also see, does wage act similarly to value? Now, I thought this was a particularly helpful dashboard for me personally because I found it very clear to see the relationships, especially with the bottom left chart for value and ability. There's a clear logarithmic relationship, and when you look at the trend line, this actually has an R-squared value of very close to 1. It's over 0.95. So it's explaining a lot of the data. It's a very good fit for our data. And it has a very, very low p-value of less than 0.001. So, very confident with that trend line, and so we can say certainly that there is such a relationship. The other thing that I wanted to be able to do with this dashboard is, again, tie it to other dashboards. So what you can do is you can select an individual player, and you can load player data, and that will take you to the third and final dashboard. This final dashboard is the player dashboard. It provides position-specific and skill-specific ratings. So FIFA has 6 main skills that they would consider. So you have SHO, shooting, PHY, physical ability, PAS, passing, PAC, pace, DRI, dribbling, and DEF, defense. So here we can look at an individual player like Messi, and we can see that his very high overall rating is due mostly to his dribbling ability, his passing ability, his pace, and his shooting. Similarly, on the right, we also see a radar chart for position ratings. Now that's a score out of 100 for how good a player is at a given position. Now Messi is quite good. He's the highest rated player in the game and in the world because he actually has incredibly high ratings in 16 of the 26 skills, or the 26 positions that are available. I also wanted to include some kind of personal data on this information on this page, so that's why I threw in the player description information that you see down at the bottom and the contract details that you can see beneath that. This is good because it provides context to some of the other numbers that you see. For instance, we can see that Lionel Messi's value is very high and his wage is extremely high. They're both some of the highest in the world. But part of that is, 1, because of his rating, and 2, he's been at this club since 2004. So he is that club's main player. He's their main fan draw, and so they're able to invest more in him, pay him more money, value him higher because of that. And that's something that we wouldn't have necessarily gotten if we didn't include these contract details. The source of my data, I got this data set from Kaggle, and Kaggle actually was scraped from SoFIFA.com. SoFIFA is a fan-run statistics and metrics website that's dedicated to keeping the most up-to-date FIFA statistics available so that players can more accurately choose their squads for online battles when they play against other people. The other thing that I would consider a data source is I wanted to tie the colors of my dashboard into FIFA somehow. And while FIFA doesn't post any official color scheme anywhere that I could use, I was able to find color schemes for a number of FIFA-run events, such as the latest Men's World Cup in 2018. I kind of liked these colors, and they worked well for visibility. There's a clear differentiation between the red and the blue, and the other colors also just are visually appealing with their dashboards. So I selected this one, and it was nice that I could tie it, again, back to FIFA. The trickiest part of this analysis was the data cleaning and just formatting the data correctly for Tableau. So some of the issues that I ran into were in the original data set, there were position ratings, for instance. As you can see here, LS is left striker. Now that position rating is just a string of 88 plus 2. For whatever reason, they include some modifier, and that obviously you can't compare those strings, So I had to do some formulas to clean that into a single value, which would be an integer, and then I'd be able to run analysis on it. Now in this case, I just decided that if there was a modifier in there that I would, add the two rather than leave it as a flat 88. I wasn't able to find much information about what this modifier is or how it's calculated, but I thought if it was in there in the data, then I may as well try and capture it. The other cleaning I had to do with all the monetary values. So we can see here that wages and value both have a couple things. They both have letters at the end. They aren't actually full numbers, they're strings, and they have a currency indicator at the beginning. They both have euro. So I had to do a rather complex formula to clean out both of those things and again turn it into an integer so that we can do comparison between the data. The other major step of this process was pivoting a set of fields. If we go back to the player dashboard for a minute, we can see that there are two radar charts. Now, radar charts are not inherently in Tableau, and Tableau does not support them very well. So the only way around it is to put your data in a very specific format. And my data was not in that format. So what I had to do is I had to create a pivot of a bunch of fields so that I could create a radar chart of those fields. However, I have two radar charts, which means I need at least two separate pivots or sets of pivot fields. Tableau only supports pivoting one field at a time, and the only way around that is to combine multiple data sources. So what I had to do is I would pick a set of fields, I would pivot it, save that, export the Tableau data to a CSV, and then use that as a separate data source and reconnect it back to my original data source. And if you do that a few times, you end up with a data connection that looks something like this, where I have my original data, it's called data modified here because that's after I did some cleaning, and then it's connected to essentially copies of itself again, but each one is named after the type of data that's in the pivot. So that first one, big 6, that's for the 6 key statistics that they've been put into pivoted fields so that I can run a radar chart on them. Similarly with the positions data, and finally with the contract CSV, that allows me to have a nice contract table that you see at the bottom of the player screen. When I was doing my data exploration, geographic data was the first thing that popped out to me when I was looking in Excel, and I really enjoy how Tableau handles geographic data, so I really wanted to make sure that I used that. That was one of the main drivers for me thinking that I should do an analysis of something by country, some value by country. And it got me thinking, there's a big debate over which country produces the best soccer players or is the best producer of soccer players. And I thought that this would be a great opportunity to try and answer that question with actual data. As I started to play around with what things worked well in the nationality field, a lot of the integers, things like the player value, player wages, and count of players, they all worked really well together. And it was just a question of how I wanted to visualize it. It was tough at first because, as you notice on the main dash, you have those extreme outliers like Central Africa, where they have extremely high values, but the number of players just isn't that high. Originally, my analysis doesn't make those look particularly good. They appear as if they are the top producers, and it's not a good indication of what the data actually is saying. So what I did is I changed it up to do the average value of players, and then also include the information about how many records are there so that the average doesn't become misleading. Additionally, I built out the charts for top earners and highest wages to give a glimpse of what those outliers might be and allow people to recognize that the underlying data may be being affected by those extremely large outliers. So again, here we can see in Central Africa there's very dark red, and over near Saudi Arabia there's some very dark red. That's because there are few numbers, and if you hover over, the player count for those is actually quite small. So making sure to include that player count as part of my definition of best, as well as including it in the tooltip, just, again, really helped to provide context to the data. You can also see that I'm using a red color scheme. This is, again, from the FIFA color scheme data set. The red looked really nice with the shading, and it goes well with the background and the blue text. When I was doing exploration for the club level data, I wanted to check really anything that I could to try and find interesting stories to tell. And one thing that I also was thinking about is, as an economist, clubs are employing people specifically to scout players and to assign a monetary value to them. So if we can use FIFA ratings as an actual measure of ability, we could look at value versus FIFA rating and see how good are the scouts doing. And here we can see that there's a very clear correlation. As player ability increases, their value increases as well. Age is also a factor here. So the color bar on the bottom of blue to red shading, that's for age. And so we can see that young players tend to maybe get overvalued a little bit because they actually have a lot of chance to grow and they have potential, whereas the older players in red, they're all maybe being undervalued a little bit because they may not be as productive in the future, or they may be falling off quickly. But it was great to see that this popped out right away. As soon as I started looking at the data, it was very clear. Finally, for player data, I actually wanted to do more with player data than I was able to do. One of the issues with my data cleaning process, with pivoting all that data, is it really exploded the size of my data set. So this started with around 20,000 rows, and by the time I put in only 3 of those pivoted fields, it was up to almost 1 million or more. I believe it was more than 1 million. But in either case, my computer couldn't handle it. Tableau absolutely could not handle it. It was throwing errors whenever I tried to add additional pivoted fields. So it kept some of the player data that I wanted to look at out. The big 6 key metrics, they're all derived from other underlying metrics, and I was hoping to make another radar chart of those metrics as well as the position and the big 6, but I wasn't able to do so. I am happy, however, with how the position ratings turned out. It was a lot of effort to make this radar chart and to get everything looking good. Even the background image, as you can see, is not part of Tableau. I had to manually create that. But it was a great learning experience, and also I thought it was very cool as I was studying it to see the variation, because you have some players that really are only specialized in a couple different positions, and then you have others, like Messi, which is this example, where he can just do it all, which makes it even more impressive, and that really lends some weight to his high overall rating. The other radar chart that I made is very similar. I just saw one radar chart, and honestly, I was kind of enamored with it, so it seemed like a really good way to display multiple different aspects of the player data. It worked really well because there were so many variables that I wanted to study. In this case, there's 26. For the other one, there's 6. And then I was going to look further at the individual metrics, and there's something like 30 of those. So they all would have been really great opportunities for radar charts, which we didn't get a chance to cover very much in class. And now I get to talk about the results. So, which countries are the best producers of soccer players? I actually found something kind of surprising here. Brazil and Spain and South America are usually talked about as being sort of the biggest producers, but Brazil actually comes up second in a lot of these metrics. I would consider them not the best producer of players or the top producer of players. Something that I was not expecting is Portugal, actually. So Portugal had not only the highest overall value, they also had the highest overall ratings for their players. And when I compared their player count to Brazil and referenced the different populations of the two countries, Portugal has way higher player count than you'd expect for a country that's 1/20th of the size of Brazil. For them to have that and to have the average player be more valuable, I think is pretty incredible. Now, obviously, there are some really large values. Cristiano Ronaldo is from Portugal, and he's one of the most valuable players in the world, so he definitely is an outlier that helps Portugal here. But they have 322 professional players in this data set, so only so much of that value can be explained by him. So I really do believe that Portugal, surprisingly enough, is the top producer of soccer players, at least in this data set. Obviously, the FIFA data set may have issues where it's not including necessarily all of the world leagues, so there could be some bias there. But even with this data set, I would have expected Brazil to be number one and Spain to be number two. We can see that Spain is up there, especially in terms of the number of players they produce, but the average value is just not high enough to make them the top producer. The other thing I wanted to check was if there was a quantifiable relationship between player value, rating, and I also wanted to look at age. There very much is. This logarithmic relationship that we talked about, it does exist. It's very clear in the data, and age is also definitely a factor. I think this chart makes it very clear. Again, all the younger players, they're getting a lot more value than the older players because they have all these years of production still left. And an interesting thing that I found was actually that the coefficient of this logarithm, essentially how willing teams are to spend money on players, it varies quite a bit based on the size of the team. So if we look at some of the largest and wealthiest teams, like Barcelona, they have a ratio or coefficient, of about 5 or 6. But if we look at a very small team, they have coefficients in the ranges of like 1 to 2. So the logarithmic relationship is still there, but it's a significant difference, 500% between the very small clubs and the very big clubs with regards to how much can they overspend or how much can they overvalue a player. We know that football, or soccer as it's called in the US, is a game of money, but I think that this data just really highlights it in a way that I was not expecting. The bigger clubs can just afford to pay more for all the talented young players, and that's why we see all these blue dots beneath the trend line, where they're all getting, again, valued very highly because of their future production. The last question that I wanted to answer was, for a given individual, which of their metrics are driving their rating, potentially their value, and their wages. And again, if we look at Messi, it's quite clear. So he's a 94 overall rating, and that's coming because of his incredible dribbling ability, his very high pace, his spectacular passing, and his high shot value. And again, he really does so well at so many different positions. 16 out of 26 is a large number, a good percentage, and that's why he's showing as one of the best players. So this is just kind of reiterating what I said. The last thing was that we can see from this previous page, he has been with his team since 2004. So because he has been there so long, he's a major cornerstone of the team. He's a big fan draw, and that's part of why his value is so high. And I make a little joke here. He's definitely worth it since he won his 6th overall World MVP award, the Ballon d'Or, this year. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I will be happy to answer. Thanks.